knocking on the door gained volume and pace. Dew forced his tired body to roll around and stand up. Taking the key lying somewhere on the ground, he began unlocking the door and opening it a tad. 2 sets of eyes were staring at him, of whom he knew one. "I assume Avery isn't here," said Aaron, who had positioned himself in front of a guard unknown to Dew. "Why are you looking for her?" Dew asked back hoarsely, continuing to block the view into the room. "She's been missing from duty for 2 hours now. The princess found herself wondering about her presence. So, what do you know?" The man cut straight to the point. Dew glanced back, searching for a good way to describe the situation, and ended up explaining. "Avery was stabbed this noon, but she survived." The weight of Aaron's palm pushed against the door, but Dew held against it. "Give me details," the man demanded. "Jonah stabbed her in the heart at noon. He's gone now." "Why?" "Personal dispute," Dew lied. "But how? She can't just get injured by blades," Aaron noticed while putting more and more force against the door. "Please let her rest," the one holding the door shut begged. "She just needs time right now." The general didn't listen and forced Dew to step away so he could enter. Avery's position had barely changed. She had turned her head to the other side and had brought her hand under the blanket, but that was it. Dew couldn't begin to imagine how painful laying on her wings must be. Aaron knelt down next to her. "How did you stop the bleeding?" he asked. "I used cloth to soak it up and put the pressure bandage around her chest. Please don't take off the blanket. I haven't had the time to give her a different shirt." Aaron gestured towards the door, and the guard standing outside closed it while going away. His hand on the hilt of the knife in his pocket, he watched alerted as Aaron folded the sheet and cape away to uncover her body and carefully examine the wound. "And it soaked out all of that?" he asked in disbelief while pointing at the pile of sheets Dew had thrown into the corner. He responded by nodding. "How on earth?" The man held his palm over her mouth before placing 2 fingers on her neck. "Are you sure that's all her blood? She has both pulse and breath, even though it's weak," Aaron asked again. Dew recalled. "Jonah only had minor injuries. Most of his blood should be on the stairs after I stabbed him in the shoulder." "Good job. Anyway, I'll call someone to stitch this up. Just stay here." "I'm not planning on going," he stated, and watched as Aaron rushed out the door. Dew began to collect the parts of the chair and put them next to the pile of bloody sheets. There was no way to repair it in this state, so he already planned on buying her a new one. About what he was supposed to do next with himself he didn't dare to think. When he was done with the tiny task, Dew sat back down on the bed and stared at his hands. The circular dent from where the ring used to be was still red from the pressure. He wondered what would happen if he ceased to exist. Many people who seriously miss him weren't there. Josephine was disappointed in him. Avery shouldn't miss him, but would end up blaming it on herself. Jonah was gone, and if Alba knew, she could potentially get him tortured to death anyway. It didn't matter how good of a person he used to be, one betrayal was enough to screw it all up. And he knew it, and he hated himself. It wasn't like he had ever felt more than a mild like towards the Boer hybrid. Why had he reacted upon the gesture? Had he really been that desperate? And why did it continue for so long? How on earth did he not fight tooth and nail to have Jonah let go of him the night before? And then there was the moment shortly before Jonah vanished and had him go completely numb just by a single touch. What had he done to Dew? "Are you cold or heartbroken?" He heard a rough and tired voice beside him. He flinched as if to turn around, but decided against this. "You're awake," he noticed. "It appears so." "How do you feel?" The Merlin wanted to turn around, crawl towards her to absorb her movement with his eyes. "How does one feel after being stabbed in various body parts and in the heart by someone you thought you could trust with your life, and that twice by different people?" "Never mind," she replied. For one moment Dew asked himself who the second person was. Then he understood. I have a question," he stammered. "Ask away, it's not like I could punch you away anyway," Avery dryly chuckled, but it was clear talking hurt her. He searched for words. He didn't want to sound irresponsible or innocent, but wanted to assure himself of his thesis. I followed him. After he did this to you, and I wanted to kill him, he began. I stabbed him, I got the knife into his shoulder, but then he just touched me and I couldn't do. Du went silent. Maybe she had understood, maybe she was more confused than before. He couldn't tell because he didn't dare to look at her. He was probably only blaming the other. He didn't take responsibility for his own actions he committed out of pleasure. What pleasure? The pain, the humiliation, the loss of connection to his partner, even to his own body? What pleasure was there? His hand went towards his shoulder and the other around his waist as an uncomfortable tearing went through his head towards his torso. I understand. That was all she said to send the first tears rolling down his cheeks, but she continued. I wouldn't have guessed he'd go this far. I'm sorry to ask you, but how did it go the first time? Du's mind went back to the day on the clearing in the forest. We went to throw knives. We took turn, and he praised me with words or patted my shoulder. Then he began to talk about you, where he took me into a tight grip. And then, without a warning, he just threw me down. Had there been fog? In his head he couldn't even decipher the place where he had thrown the knives towards, not the path towards it, and even less Jonah's face, only his eyes. What was your first thought about it? Her voice was pressed, like Aaron pushing against the door with someone weaker barely holding it back. Du tried to recall the moment before his hands had gone under his shirt and started undressing him. Confused. I didn't know what happened, but I did at the same time. The scene in his head didn't stop playing at his command. Lying exposed on the blue cape with his hands nailed above his head, he hadn't been able to move. Du's facial muscles tensened while he tried to get his mind focused, but it wouldn't let him. It was as if the pain, and just the pain returned, which had had his insides cramp and his eyes tear up both in memory and reality. He had to push his back against the wall, pull his legs towards his body and hit his face with his arms as if Avery couldn't figure out tears were already running in streams. I see, Avery spoke darkly. The door was opened and Aaron, accompanied by another man, came in. The new person carried a leather suitcase and immediately walked towards Avery. Didn't you say she was unconscious? The medic complained. Isn't it better to see her awake? She's alive, Aaron replied with both a relieved and an upset tone. Unconscious patients are easier to stitch up because they don't scream. The man threw his suitcase onto the bed. He didn't even ask for consent as he took away the blanket and cape again. Neither did he hesitate in tearing the bandages off her bare chest. The blood flow had completely ceased pouring out by now, but after taking out the fabric in the wound, a small trickle began to run over her ribs. I don't have drugs. If you scream, I'll punch you unconscious, the so-called healer declared. Avery just smiled spitefully while she responded, As you say, doctor. I do doubt your ability to even pierce that needle through me. Good luck. The man's eye twitched as he went on to pick out a needle and thread. Avery, could you please recall the attack? Du said Jonah stabbed you due to a personal dispute. What's with that? Aaron solicitously wanted to know. Sure, she replied and began to recall the events as she remembered them as the medic struggled to close up the wide gash over her chest. Avery's voice showed little sign of pain, but the casual clenching of her fist signaled she felt more than she let the other people know. Jonah had followed her while she was on her way from Alba to her room. Her vision had gone dark, so she didn't notice the knife he had had on his person. When he slashed first, it had been aimed for her neck, but she had heard the motion and backed off and only received a vague cut on her chest. Next he had forced her onto the bed where she had little space to move, but getting her there had caused him to take several hits to his head and stomach. As he had delivered his final blow to her heart, he had revealed his initial plan on having it look like suicide, but miserably failed. Obviously, she was leaving something out. Dew was only half listening when Aaron fell into a rant which included curses towards the boar hybrid and towards himself, as if he could have known the intentions the new recruit could have had. The uninvolved one stayed in his curled-up position, trying to keep his face together at least for the time the other two were here. Finally, the medic had troublesomely placed the last stitch and knotted the ends of the thread together. Wordlessly he packed up his supplies and left, not even advice on how to treat the wound he had given her. Avery had given up the attempt of sitting up long ago and laid motionlessly on the same spot she had been stabbed in 2 hours ago, her eyes lazily laid on her general, while her fingers traced the edges of her new wound. "I report to the princess. You don't move for the next week. Do you understand?" Aaron instructed her with a muddle-headed expression on his face, which was damp from stressful sweat. She smirked a little and promised, "You got it, boss." The general nodded, and his fingers went through his short curly hair one more time before he left and closed off the room behind him. They were alone again. The very moment the relief of having no strangers around him, Dew's face immediately collapsed like a sandcastle being hit by an incoming wave. It was just too much for him. It had been 6 times. 6 times, and he hadn't even considered himself to be in the situation he never thought of being in a lifetime. At least the sobs disturbed his mind, and no clear thought could manifest itself. No sentence, no picture, and no sensation except the cramping pain in his abdomen, which constantly reminded him of his miserable self. It was cold. The snowflakes were still dancing outside and covered the world in a silent layer of glitter, but he couldn't see it through his blurry eyes. Dew didn't know how long he had been sulking in pitiful feelings, but the cold began to slowly get to him, and real shivers soon joined his sobs. He began to despise himself for his selfish behavior. Why was he crying? He wasn't the one carrying an open wound from the experience. He had never been left alone during times of torment, yet still Dew was crying about his own little heartbreak. Maybe he should throw himself off the roof into the real coldness of the air and land in the soft snow where his body would be crushed by the impact, leaving nothing more than a disgusting mess of flesh, blood, and bones. His eyes wandered towards the window but quickly ended up back in his lap. It was too scary, and it was too cold. But it wasn't. It was warm, and it was soft, and it was cozy. He sank into it. He sank into her, who had sat up anyway to lay the soft blanket around his shivering body and warm him with her stretched-out wing. "We'll figure this out," she uttered while holding the dark cape to her chest. "I'm just glad that you're able to feel rage at what was done to you. I cannot." Sharply he sucked in air before crying out, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." A hand brushed against his cheek, taking some of the tears with it. "You don't have to be. It's not your fault. Listen, it's not your fault. You couldn't have—" "I could have fought back," he interrupted her loudly. "I stabbed him now, but I didn't do it then, and now you're almost dead. I fucking killed you." "Do I need you to shut up? I need you to stop believing you can go against someone who tops me in physical strength and who can twist your mind with nothing more than a touch. I need you to stop thinking of yourself as weak as well. You did it. You managed to fight back." Avery intensely spoke into his ears. Another few sobs shook his chest and unsteadied his breath. He was miserable. "I could have saved you." She was silenced for a moment. Her palm stroked over his shoulder in small circles. She was actually touching him after everything. The dragon hybrid bitterly replied, "And so could I. I could have known better, and in the end you did save me. You were here before he could gut me. Why? Why were you here?" "I was in the city before going to work," he remembered, "and brought you something." Dew freed himself from the warm blanket to stand up and walk towards the blue piece of clothing which was laying close to the chest. He could feel the item through the fabric and quickly grabbed it out of the pocket to bring it back to her. Placing the blanket on his shoulders, Avery eyed what he carried in his hands. You stretched it out, and she took it. I think it was last winter that you complained about the cold around your horns. The shopkeeper didn't have anything more fitting, but said a scarf like this could work as well, with a few tweaks. He explained a little more steadily. She stroked the soft light brown scarf, which had been sewn into 2 long but thin loops. A birthday gift? She asked softly, and Dew nodded. For the first time in the last month, Dew saw her genuinely smile. It was a small gesture, but more than he could have hoped for. "Thank you," Avery whispered and gently laid her hand on the back of his.